military airplane. You are approaching my military security air. Please go away quickly in order to run apartments.
As you may know, I'm a fan of the ACOG, so people want to know, would I use the new Primary Arms 5X Micro Prism as a viable optic choice? So I actually got to see this optic before it's released at a national Pew Pew show and was instantly excited to try it. I tried to buy it that weekend only to find out that it wasn't out yet, so I put my pre-order in ASAP and waited like the rest of the peasants. After waiting months for my pre-order, it finally arrives. Open box, warranty booklet, trash, instruction manual, trash, unwrapping, trash, and finally, my very own 5X Micro Prism. Rubber caps that I'm definitely gonna lose, nice. Rear diopter, nice. Mount spacer 1, 2, and one last spacer, nice. Extra screws for mount heights, nice. Included star keys, nice. 1/4 MOA adjustments on the turrets, super nice on that one. And the ACSS Aurora that I talked about in my ACOG reticle video, this time in yards. I'm liking what I see. What the China is this crap? This optic comes with long and short screw sets. The mount, 3 adapters to get a custom height and distance back to the eye you want, and a straight spacer for some extra height, or to use as a standalone riser. You can just use the optic with the stock mount only if you're running a drop stock style weapon like the AK. If you want to run a rear iron sight, but also get the optic back for a preferred eye relief, you can put the straight spacer under the offset spacer of your choice, and it will even clear taller iron sights like the Maytech rear iron. This mount is so ugly that I think I'll end up running it with just the straight spacer to get something that doesn't look like it'll snap if I dropped it. On the box, it shows you the mount configurations possible, as well as the height above rail using different combinations to input in your ballistic calculator to true in the BDC like I showed in my Unity cog mount video, since it slightly changes the trajectory. Also, don't forget to add in the height from the bore to the rail, since this box shows you your rail to optical center, so that you input the correct height above bore into your ballistic software. There is also a top dot mount that can wedge between these spacers or mount, and a side dot mount, which will both get some chat later. For now, I want to just leave it in its stock position how it came for testing. First, let's get this thing zeroed in and trued in to eliminate any blame on the optic when running it for the next several months. This optic uses the familiar ACSS Aurora reticle that you may have seen and possibly wanted to return to the ACOG, and now your wishes have been granted, this time in yards. I first zeroed it directly at 100 yards using the tip of the chevron here using Winchester M193, and then immediately went straight out to 300 to true it in using the tip of the 300 post here. This is a process I usually take my time on to eliminate any shooter error, so I know that I have a calibrated BDC, and will show any angle errors in your first zero intersection or any velocity issues. I'm using a 16-inch barrel, which Primary Arms recommends to zero a half-inch high at 100 yards for my elevation above sea level, which I did not do. Here you can see the impacts were all low because of this. This means my 100-yard zero, although looked fine, wasn't exactly centered as we thought. Dollar bill 6 inches, there's about the center of our group when you come 6, 7 inches. Now it's time to make the turret adjustments.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Back to the firing line, it's time to shoot another group. It looks like my turret adjustments were correct, and you can see my group on the black line. I'd say that is trued in at 3, so let's go see over there if it's trued in at 400. Now let's do a quick check at 400 yards using the 400-yard stadia line here. At 400 yards, 1, 2, about 3 inches high. Maybe me, but I don't think so. It looks like my impacts were a bit high at 400, so maybe my ammo was a bit too hot, or this reticle was kinda thick to guarantee that I was overlapping the line on the reticle over the line on the target accurately. More on that later. I'll probably just split the difference between 300 and 400 yards by adjusting my impacts down 1 click or 1 inch at 400 yards, which will only move me down 3/4 of an inch at 300. Now a quick test to see how this optic and or mount combo holds zero. I'll take a few shots at 100 yards, bang it up a bit, and repeat to see if I get any impact shift. This is why you always recheck your zero after hard use. Not sure if the mount got rattled or the optic itself can't withstand impact, so I'll re-zero real quick and well. Before we move on, let's talk about how I test optics. I give zero craps about what's on paper. I care about its usability and versatility, and I wanted to give this optic a true fair shot, which can only be done by running it through a gauntlet of scenarios. For example, I'll run drills that start out at extended distances to see how quick I can get my sight picture and use the point of aim to get hits. Shooting off of less than optimal objects like this circular rail can cause instability, which can expose bad eye boxes. Other positions that vary in elevation will put your head and neck closer or sometimes further away to the optic, revealing how good or bad the eye relief may be. Closing in the distance, maybe taking a standing shot after a bit of cardio and timed stress may show how heavy an optic starts to feel, or even the overall balance ratio of the weapon system and the optic together. You see, a lot of people talk about specs and also try to point out flaws in another optic choice in order to sell you a new optic. It doesn't always mean the new one is better. This isn't exactly about this optic in particular, just in general. After this situation, maybe we'll run through the woods so that we lose sight of the target and we'll emerge at a whole new angle, forcing us to see how quickly we can identify the threat. This helps to see how a large field of view gets you back on target to engage. At this new angle, you can see the sun is now directly in my face, causing light blur and also making the target harder to find, exposing glass clarity and sunshade flaws. All of these points will be discussed in detail coming up. But now I head to a barricade with legs that are starting to warm up a bit from running. At the barricade, reticle design and usability at angles, including the zero distance, will change your trajectory to include mount height and truing. This optic is new to me, and at this point I have zero bias, but I will find the pros and cons eventually in use, not on paper. This is not a paid review. There's a lot of things people don't tell you about an optic to make the sale, but that's just not my style. As I close into this make-believe shoot house, I have my name and a color-coded number next to it that I must read here. Now that I know my threat's description, a blue number 2, I can begin to cut my angles and destroy the threats one by one. In this case, I switch to the side-mounted Trijicon RMR and instantly notice that the blue tint and curved glass slows me down, seeing the blue number 2s. You'll see me dip my muzzle down to use my real eyes and then engage with the dot. I'm telling you about this because it's sometimes a surprise where something can quickly become a setback, and the only way to know it is to get out and run it through a gauntlet of situations like this RMR. I can already tell you that after this run, I'll be switching directly to the SRO to the side. I didn't use the Micro 5X here because I wouldn't this close in real life. All of the opinions in this video are built around using this optic in dynamic situations, which will lead to my final conclusions at the end of this video. Now, does this optic actually work up close if I wanted? Of course it can.
So, I'm just basically going to do the build drill live, so that way
They know I'm not bullshitting this stuff. All right, ready? This test is fine on a static range, but I can make any optic work in this scenario. So 239 could have been faster, sub 2 seconds. A test like this is more telling about your ability to use the optic, not if the optic is usable. The minute I put multiple threats in different scenarios, in different directions, I wouldn't be using the 5x magnification this close, when I can actually use a dot which is superior here. Having said all of this, we can now focus on the good. The good and main reasons I wanted this optic started with the weight. I already like prism optics for this lightweight attribute, and this comes in at an impressive 9.4 ounces with a mount, 5 ounces lighter than my beloved TA01 ACOG. I've been running this thing for several months almost exclusively, and wow does this thing feel like you're just running an iron sight rifle only. I ran iron sights a good bit of my Army career, and some days having a light overall package just feels right. Of course it looks very strange sitting back this far, but the weight savings make it worth it. I've been chunking around heavier optics simultaneously during this 5x journey, and it really puts things into perspective shaving off some weight. Truly one of the major bonuses running this optic. In relation to the weight savings, this compact design starts to grow on you a bit as well. If I put this 5x next to an ACOG, you can see how much smaller the dimensions are in comparison, from both a side profile and a top profile. They also gave it a slick, smooth housing that removes all snag factors while still protecting the flush turret adjusters. No caps to remove, but how often will you be adjusting this outside of zeroing anyway? By having low turrets like this, no cap will get in your field of view behind a top dot if you happen to presentate at a funny angle or block your dot when running passively under night vision, or blocking the side dot view if that's your preference. I'm not sure how sealed this open turret design is underwater compared to a sealed cap design because I haven't tested it, and I couldn't find any waterproof rating on the website. This design isn't overly sexy and still has a shine to it that screams cheap, but it is practical, which in its own way opens you up to the housing design. Next, the included mount options are very cool for the end users to get the right option they need right out of the gate. Using the ACOG footprint was a very humble move so that end users can avoid proprietary mounts when there are so many ACOG mount options available to fit your liking, including quick detach mounts. The mounts may not be pretty aside from the straight riser, but you can tell they were thinking about the end user having the mounting solution that fits the rifle build. If you truly don't like them, just leave them in the box and buy an aftermarket mount, which is what most people do anyway. For a little extra cash, you can buy a side canted mount that uses Glock MOS plates to get a one-stop shop for the dot you may have or plan to have, which I totally get why they went this route. It saves a lot of SKU numbers having to stock multiple footprint types, which probably helped them get it launched faster. This mount is one piece that replaces the stock clamp plate that came with the optic, which we'll talk about more later. This is great for a canted 1X for shooters who like the dot to be at a similar height over bore. I ran this with the RMR for quite a while to keep the weight down, since this plate in RMR only weighs 3.4 ounces, totaling 11.8 ounces overall with the RMR, since it replaces the mount clamp plate. Of course, I prefer the SRO for its window size, clarity, and flatter image, which grew on me quite a bit. I ended up running this configuration for several months while moving from further distances and closer distances in the same setting. It didn't even feel like I had added any weight to the rifle with this, but it's not very night vision friendly to get passive hits. Passive aiming is a growing method, and in the future, more of you will see the reason why you should consider it on a prism setup. To get this passive performance, you can buy the top mount from Primary Arms, which also utilizes the Glock MOS plates, and you can tell they thought about the end user by offering this top option in the forward position that I love so much from my TA02 ACOG video. This mount simply sandwiches between the optic and the mount, which also works in conjunction with the side mount if you want two lightweight dots to fit your needs. With an optic this lightweight, I honestly wouldn't judge you for adding both. Weighing all of this together, it only came in at 13.2 ounces, lighter than the EOTech Unity combo at 14 ounces. Again, still lighter than my stock ACOG, but way more capable. You have a 5X with a BDC, a day dot, a night vision dot, and since this sits back a bit more, it feels very similar in weight and maneuverability to a single red dot build, believe it or not. You can still get to the inside RMR button as well, since the top mount does not block access. Now before I go praising this top mount, stick around because this thing is quite a letdown. So you all know that durability is important to me so that I can faithfully trust my optic to survive abuse and retain zero, or at least the ability to re-zero after the abuse. Let's first start with a quick zero confirmation. hits were off target, but after some quick field adjustments, we're now on center. Let's take the rifle real quick and simulate dropping the rifle onto a chunk of broken asphalt, and then see where we hit after. Seems to be immune to some grunt abuse, so let's step it up a notch.
Light's good.
Now let's see how the optic does on target. Clearly this isn't enough abuse to take this optic out of commission, so let's up the violence a bit. Okay, well that's a bit more brutal and probably unrealistic, but I wanted to know for myself since this optic was something that I was super excited about. Illumination still looks good and I bent the diopter, but the overall condition looks like it took the beating like a man. Last check on target to see if the zero held, and if not, at least see if the optic can still be re-zeroed from any deviation. Here I'm going to aim center to the face because it's hard to tell where I'm hitting. Just a bit high, so I'm going to adjust down and aim for throat. I'm not gonna lie, I'm quite surprised at how tough this thing is, and I feel a whole lot better about trusting this optic on a combat rifle. I did slightly bend the diopter, but it still twists, and I did have a small chip in the rear glass here. The optic turrets still dial fine, and the illumination works perfectly to include the Aura Wake feature. If you're worried about durability, I'd say you can trust this optic. The feature that really gets me pumped is the 1/4 MOA turret adjustments. For me personally, the finer the adjustment, the better. If you watched my Truing the ACOG video, you know that fine-tuning your impacts at 300 meters or yards using the 300 stadia line will calibrate the BDC in much better than a closer zero conformation only. Earlier in the video, I was able to get my elevation dead center because these finer increments do just that, which I'll explain. If you had only 1/2 MOA adjustments, imagine that while shooting at 300, your impacts are very close to center, but still 1 inch to the left. With 1/2 MOA adjustments, each click will be multiplied by 3, making your 1/2 MOA become 1.5 inches at 300 yards. With 1 click, this would jump us past the center 1/2 inch. Unhappy with this truing, our only option would be to go back left 1 click. This is what I call jumping a zero, and we'd have to settle with going back right 1 click, landing 1/2 inch right off center, and that's the best we'd get. These 1/4 MOA adjustments will become roughly 3/4 of an inch at 300 yards. So if we were 1 inch left at 300, our now 3/4 inch adjustments at this distance would only have us off 1/4 of an inch from center. Much more precise when calibrating the reticle in. If you care about precision like me, this is very frustrating, so now you know why I like the finer adjustments. Some people are cool with mediocre zeros, and that's okay. I know plenty of good enough type people, and I'm just saying that I appreciate primary arms going this route. The next feature I like is the reticle options. I got the Aurora BDC version because the mill version, although under high demand from prism lovers, isn't why I buy prism optics. I don't consider a prism to be a long-range optic, no more than I consider a red dot magnifier combo to be a long-range optic. Prisms to me are a lightweight, robust, intermediate option, so I got the BDC version, which gives you the awesome ranging and wind hold dots included. The mill version is also very cool, so you can get something that fits your needs, like using it on an AK or other calibers not in 5.56, although some will prefer it for 5.56 as well. I also like that this BDC is based in yards so that the zeroing and truing process is very range friendly to the US. You won't be able to escape the chevrons, so circle dots and crosshairs are out of the question, and that's fine. It's not my first rodeo. It still has useful markers inside to size, range estimate, and call for wind, so the chevron will serve you well. The other feature that sold me is that although small, it's actually a 5x rather than a 3 or 4x we find in similar size optics. I was never interested in a 3x micro since I already prefer more magnification. Another reason I don't run the TA33 that much. As soon as I heard this small sucker was a 5X, it had me intrigued since I see them shine in a mid-range roll. Since prisms aren't really a quick reflex type sight, you'll want to complement with a red dot either up top or to the side for quick 1X work and NV use, so the more magnification the better in my opinion. I'm not saying I want 10X in a prism, but hey, I wouldn't say no to 6X in the next gen if it's still this small, but this magnification does come at a cost to other issues. But this thing was only $400, which will help entry-level prism shooters pick one up if it fits their needs. I have no idea how they got all this in such an inexpensive package unless... Jokes aside, at this cost, it basically eliminates most, if not all of the previous prism options they make, except maybe the 1X prism, but that's for another time. This low cost of $400 really is appealing to some who don't want to spend the money on something they think is just as good. And boy are we going to find out if this is just as good later. So everyone wants a diopter apparently, and this was a feature used to make older optics look less desirable. Not only does this risk the depth of water submersion and add extra parts, I wanted to see if this actually helps people with bad eyesight compared to the ACOG. Some people say that an optic is lacking without a diopter, so I started asking people which optic looked more clear side by side. I first allowed the shooter to focus the diopter on target in the distance until they could see every clear detail. After that, I handed them an ACOG to compare and started a scorecard to see which one was better.
Oh yeah, it's still way better.
None of these people knew that I'd be handing them the ACOG second to keep it honest and fair.
Is this one? That's by a lot.
Every time, the optic without the diopter was favored.
Oh, this one's so much better. I definitely think this is better.
I mean, this glass isn't bad. It's not like it's smoky or anything, but like, I mean, the ACOG is crystal clear.
Yeah, real close.
I then started asking non-shooters who have no idea what either of these optics are to make it even more honest for the skeptics, and
I feel like I like this one better.
another win for the ACOG.
But I also like the crosshair on this one better than the other one. That's probably why a lot of it too. Yeah.
It wasn't until later that I had found out what makes a diopter useful. I had the first person who said the primary arms was more crisp and clear to their eye.
Yeah, this one's crisper.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not as good. It's not as, like, it's crisper closer, but further away it's blurrier.
Okay, so what's blurry, the reticle or the car in the distance?
Car in the distance is blurry.
So in that one, the car was not blurry.
This one, the car was not blurry over there. This one it is. Plus this is narrower.
Yes, it is.
It's a lot less range of what you're seeing.
Later that day, the same person had looked through both optics again, this time with his prescription glasses that he had taken off. With his prescription glasses, the ACOG had become the winner, and without, he had bad vision, which was assisted by the diopter. If you know right now that you have less than optimal vision, then the diopter is definitely something you will want if you ever think you'll be without glasses for any reason. A big win for the diopter on the primary arms optic.
Like, it's way better. Like, night and day better.
That's interesting, man. Another surprise I thought was pretty cool was the Live Awake feature. While filming reticle footage carefully for you guys, the reticle randomly turned off on me. I had forgot all about this auto wake feature, so I gave it a small shake and voila, it's back on. I then filmed it still, and after 2 minutes, it turned off again. A simple movement and back to business. I didn't care much about this at first, but not only does it save battery life, I actually stopped thinking about turning my optic on or off at the range. Since it always turns back to the illumination setting you left it on, it becomes very repeatable and familiar, like running a red dot with an auto awake feature. I don't run illumination much, but when I do, I actually enjoyed this function more than I thought I would. The Shake Awake feature also ties directly into battery life. Online, they state this has a battery life of 25,000 hours to 50,000 hours, which I'm guessing depends on which brightness setting you use. If you use the max brightness of 13, you'll have the 25,000 hour life. But with this auto shut off and shake awake feature, you'd be surprised that this may actually last you longer than the 50,000 hours of leaving the optic on non-stop like an Aimpoint T2. This 25K will be in real use, not in storage, draining your battery like a microdot would without an auto shut off, avoiding any stress about battery life numbers, possibly outlasting your red dot with this feature. As far as brightness goes, we'll get to that later. Finally, the last feature that got me pumped was the longer eye relief. So many people complain about the shorter eye relief using prism optics, except magnifier gang. So this 2.7-inch eye relief will save you some scarring under heavy use, literally. Even with this prism set to the rear, the extra eye relief does help when shooting in more upright positions when nose to charging handle distances aren't instant. This eye relief is very reminiscent of the TA11 ACOG that people favor over the shorter 4X eye relief models, but it's not quite the TA33 level of eye relief. Of course, you can collapse the stock a bit as well if you have T-Rex arms to guarantee a decent sight picture, but don't get too excited about this longer eye relief just yet, because it's a little deceptive. Since I'm under no obligation to say nice things about an optic that I bought with my own money, I'm going to give you the good with the bad and the ugly. If you decide to buy this optic thinking it's going to put you in an eye relief heaven, then think again. This longer eye relief of 2.7 inches is more generous than the 4X ACOG with a hidden downside. If you think of eye relief and eye box using the 4X ACOG like a cone shape, everything will make more sense. If we start our eye back here where our gamma is behind the optic, and add in our sight or field of view from our eye, you can see the blind spot from both the body housing of the optic and some of this eye shadow here is also included in this blocked field of view. If we come back a bit, you can see our eye box and field of view collapse a bit more. And if we go back and forth a few times, you can see our view opening and closing in relation to our eye relief distance. Moving up and down changes this eye shadow location, as well as moving it side to side. As we close in towards the recommended eye relief of 1.5 inches with the ACOG, you can see our field of view opening up quite a bit. And when we get to about 1.7 inches, we will get a full field of view, free of any eye shadow to worry about. Our eye being this close gets to take full advantage of this wide-angle cone shape, which is why the 4X ACOG has such a large field of view. As you can see, you need to be close to the optic to combine your eye's peripheral to the wide angle inside of the optic. Up this close, you can move your eye around with no eye shadow to worry about, giving you a large, crisp, uninterrupted sight picture. Now if we switch to this 5X prism, which has more of a straight cylinder shape, we get a much longer eye relief of 2.7 inches for an optimal sight picture. If we move back about 6 inches behind the optic, the eye shadow does close in like the ACOG did, but not nearly as much since it's not using the cone shape. As we come back towards the optic, we start to get a good eye box around 3 inches and a perfect eye box at 2.7 inches or so. Unlike the ACOG that opens up even more as we move inside the recommended eye relief distance, the eye shadow actually closes in on us, not just a little, but a lot actually, making it unusable. This doesn't seem like an issue, but the eye relief range for this optimal sight picture is very sensitive in both distance and its concentric sensitivity. You can see with both optics at their best eye relief distance, the 5X is sensitive to movement compared to the ACOG. Out too far or in too far, and you might not have a good sight picture. This 5X prism behaves much more like an LPVO or longer range scope, which probably has to do with the internals. This prism is not just as good as the ACOG in this department, and I'll explain why this is important to me, but first, let's take a look inside to see what's going on with this prism. Well, there's only one way to see what's inside this thing, and Nate from Imperial Machine Co. accepted the challenge.
Round 1. Fight!
Holy shit, that went right through. Because we don't want to mess it up. So that's the back diopter. That would be funny. This is the front lens. And this looks like the prism here.
We can clean it all real good.
In the primary arms, we have a series of threaded rings that first hold on to the front lens, and then another spacer holding the second smaller lens. The third lens here is quite small, which I think is part of the culprit with the even smaller sized lens in front of the prism here. This is the prism section that includes the illumination package. Directly behind this is your rear lens and focus lens, or diopter. Prism optics are very robust because the prism section is suspended internally with a brass ring for zeroing while keeping the prism assembly pinched into place. These floating prisms are directly contacted by both the elevation screw here and the windage screw here when adjusted externally. When turning the dials, the prism can both move up and down and side to side, which we'll be talking about in another video for those who wonder why you might have to tap your turrets when zeroing. Let's lay out this optic and compare it to the ACOG, which we have the patent drawing for. To get this optic small, it looks like both the rear and especially the front lens have been shrunken down quite a bit in comparison to the ACOG lenses here. This small lens is probably responsible for the low light transmission as well as the eyeshadow issues. When aligning all of these glass layers to magnify the reticle and field of view, this is the trade-off for weight savings. Back to the lens, I'm not an optic engineer, but this smaller core lens seems to be causing the less preferred viewing experience compared to the larger 4X ACOG that has a larger cavity to house a larger lens, as well as some difference in the ratio to distances between them. This is the trade-off for the weight savings you gain with this optic, and hopefully the next gen will be even better. Since eye box is one of my most important things when buying an optic, let's talk about why a good eye box is important in the first place. Let's use the Aurora in the 5X against the Aurora in the 4X ACOG side by side. Right off the rip, we can see that the ACOG has a much larger field of view in comparison, which gives you a much better situational awareness. But just know this is another not just as good point to make. Now back to the eye box, you can see the movement will strip you of your sight picture much easier in the 5X. Whether you're in the correct eye relief range, further back to the rear, or inside of the proper range, this eye box is sensitive. Where this bothers me is as follows. Imagine you're scanning your terrain, and a collectivist buffalo pops up to take your private property. You bring your rifle up to take a shot, and too high, eyeshadow. Let's go back. You bring your rifle up, and too low, more eyeshadow. Again, too far left, eyeshadow. You could just adjust the sight picture, but no. Again, you can see why a good eye box is something I prioritize in my optics, and this optic can be annoying. I've ran this now for quite some time, and a bit of training does minimize the wacky eye box. But in comparison to the ACOG's massive field of view and better eye box, eyeshadow isn't a problem inside the eye relief range. You're going to see the threat and maybe need a small correction at medium distances. Up close, the better eye box and massive field of view helps guarantee the threat will be somewhere in your sight picture, so you don't have to go fishing around for your target. It's not only me who finds this sensitive eye box range to be annoying.
Miss. Just use the tip of the chevron.
I lose it. Like
I know.
it jumps away from me. Like it completely jumps away from me. Yeah, like after every shot, it's just gone. The eye box changes so much that I can't physically see through it for a split second. It's so weird.
No matter the range, the ACOG has the better eye box and field of view when speed is needed to engage the target, so no. Again, the 5X is just not as good. If you buy this optic, do not expect it to perform as well as the higher end optics in this department. When I was running this optic in conjunction with the LCAN and the ACOG, I definitely can tell that this was one of the areas I'd love to see the optic improve the most. To avoid getting this optic mixed up, I simply added a label to identify which optic I was running and put some work in.
China.
Over time, I got used to the eye box, and yes, it will do some work even if it's got the inferior sight picture. While we're here, let's talk about that field of view. The 5X has a field of view of 21 feet at 100 yards, much better than the super small TA33 ACOG field of view of 19.3 feet at 100 yards. This 5X only has a slightly better field of view in comparison, which is partially due to its extra magnification, but it's kinda small in real use. Usable for sure, but this is nowhere as big as the LCAN field of view of 34.2 feet at 100 yards on 4X magnification. Way bigger and much preferred. Shaving weight does come at the cost of field of view, but dang does this big window look amazing for finding targets fast, especially through this quality of glass. While we're on glass, let's talk about glass clarity. We all know that there's a reason this optic costs less, and glass is one area. You can see prismatic coloring on the edges here, and overall clarity is not on the same level as the ACOG or the LCAN, and does tend to tint or wash out depending on lighting. Of course, although totally usable. A lot of people don't shoot directly into the sun, but when you do, this glass turns into a hot mess. Part of this is that it has no sunshade built into the body like the ACOG, but this glass quality doesn't help either. Without a sunshade or a kill flash, this 5X glass does wash out a bit under direct sunlight. With a mixture of a sensitive eye box and a small window, some angles render this sight picture useless under sunlight, so I do recommend a kill flash or maybe tape something of a sunshade on the front if you're handy. Optics like this LCAN at least have a built-in sunshade to avoid this glare, as well as amazing glass to keep a crisp image just like the ACOG under sunlight. You can see here in foggy air how much harder it is to see a threat and find details with lower quality glass. High-end glass can deliver a much clearer picture than this, especially without the sensitive eyeshadow. In better weather, you can still see the slightly hazy glass, which you probably won't notice if this is your first prism optic. If you've used an ACOG before, then you know what high-end glass looks like, and I hope that eventually this 5X will have better glass in the future. Let's move away from the glass for a bit and focus on the reticle. I don't mind the design of the reticle per se, but the quality of it is what bothers me. Clearly people love the ACSS Aurora, but my beef is with the thickness of the lines. Back at the beginning when I was truing in the reticle, I actually filmed out to 500 yards, and let me tell you, the thickness of the BDC subtensions covered quite a bit of the target. This makes it much harder to take precise shots. You have no way to accurately know behind this thick line where your true point of aim is on the target. You can see here at 450 yards how much this reticle covers this adult deer downrange, if you even saw it here in the first place. A thinner reticle will allow you to place a more precise, lethal shot, just like I showed in my ACOG reticle video with the crosshair model. I'm not picking on this brand specifically because I also don't like the thicker reticle in the Elcan either, which reminds me of this 5X. I'm not picking on the Aurora because the ACOG version made by Trijicon utilizes thinner lines in the etching, which makes it much easier to take low probability shots out to distance. Again, not just as good. Honestly, I'd love to see them get proportionally thinner as the BDC goes out to distance, correlating the same MOA per 100 yards. Wouldn't that be awesome? Leave the chevron large for bend and aiming, and thin out the longer range subtensions for distance. Moving on, let's go over the illumination brightness. To compare, let's use the TAO2 battery-powered ACOG against the 5X. Both are an LED prism, and the TAO2 I just finished a video on recently with impressive illumination. The TAO2 uses a AA, while this uses a CR2032, which helps keep a compact design and decrease weight. If we compare the Micro 5X from beginning to end, you can see the brightness for yourself.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Definitely not as bright as the TAO2, but if you know me, I don't run prisms on full brightness. I barely use it at all, actually. This 25,000 hours on a max setting gives you almost 3 years of use in comparison to the 1.3 years with the TAO2. Again, with the Auto Awake, a ridiculous amount of battery life. No one has had one long enough yet to confirm it, but on paper it sounds amazing. Now this may not be as bright, but it worked fine in all lighting scenarios, including sunny days, and to include under white light usage indoors. Even though this white wall up close looks like it washes out the reticle, I assure you in person you can still see it just fine. Something like this. This distance of 3 feet isn't probable, so most indoor distances will be just fine using the max brightness to defeat white light. As far as night vision goes, the terrible light transmission in this small tube cannot be used passively unless you have the perfect lighting around you in a perfect position behind the optic. Even if you accomplish this scenario, only setting 1 is dim enough to be used because anything above this, like setting 2 or 3, washes out from this larger chevron size. You'll definitely want a top dot for passive use, and this also makes me wonder if settings 2 through 13 are bad for night vision use, and during the day settings 2 through 6 aren't really even visible. Why even have them, honestly? These are basically useless settings. At dusk and dawn, settings 7 through 10 work just fine, so maybe this optic has too many levels, and something like the TAO2 range would have worked just fine. While we're on the topic of illumination settings, let me just say this. This thin battery cap is either too tight to get off without pliers, or too loose and unthreads when adjusting the brightness. This is very annoying since you have to grip harder to dial with this super slippery design, often loosening the battery cap. Onto the top mount, I didn't even buy one because it looked very chintzy from the design, and Brassfax already bent his in use. I had a feeling it wouldn't take long for this to emerge, but I honestly appreciate Primary Arms to get us that forward dot position that I like. Naturally, I bought one when they came back in stock and threw it on to run my SRO. The SRO works very well as my Day 1X and my night vision backup passive optics, so naturally I needed to know if these are as weak as I've heard they are. Here again. This is just light use, ready?
Yep.
Barely. Wow, dude. Yep. Wow, dude, that was nothing.
I didn't see where it was before we did. Put it back down here.
Oh, dude, you can tell
That's
instantly.
terrible, dude.
Wow. Look, that was nothing, was it? I barely even dropped this down and it already bent. Minimal trauma, and this thing is toast. Brassbox was right, wasn't he?
100%.
No offense to the company, but do not buy this thing. If you want a top dot mount that you can trust, get the top dot mount from Hero Mod. A lot of you have been asking for a proper top dot mount for this thing, so here you go. My buddy and I got together over the last 4 months to start this company and bring this mount to market for all of you asking for a solution to the factory mount. I've seen the hundreds of comments asking for this, and sometimes you just gotta do it yourself. Not only is it made for this strange tube diameter that doesn't exist anywhere else, but it is compatible with the anti-reflection kill flash device, and finally looks like a stylish optic when paired together, with the 2 anti-rotation tabs located at the bottom here, that not only prevent the top dot from rotating under abuse and losing 0, but they also help auto-indicate the top dot dead center when you clamp the mount down to the optic, since only the top of the ring can move when clamping it down. This also eliminates having to use the Glock optic plate since it's made for the RMR and HoloSun compatible footprints. And best of all, it's made in America. If it's all the way back, you can still rotate the elevation turret, or you can ride it flush with the front of the optic if you're worried about it covering any of the top turret. I was able to turn mine just fine all the way back, and you can turn your illumination dial just fine as well with the mount installed, no problem. This is also compatible with the stock side mount from Primary Arms if you want to run both dot configurations, with room to adjust your illumination on your side dot. No blockage here. As far as the side mount goes, for those who have the preference, I also wanted to know how it held up. I simply took it to a similar height that one may bump it on, and did a few drops. It seems stronger than the factory top mount. This metal is a bit thicker, so a few drops on concrete should be a decent test. It looks like there is a slight twist, and a slight bend on the outside edge of the mount. A quick 0 looks like it'll have you back in action, and I'm on the fence about the durability. Maybe an Arasaka would be the better route, or again, just get the top mount from Hero Mod so you have a mount you can trust in a more compact package. This thing is only 1.1 ounces alone, 2.3 ounces with the RMR and battery, and with the optic comes to an awesome 12 ounces flat. Lighter than a stock ACOG just by itself, and just a hair more than only an EOTech by itself. If you decide to run this package paired with the side dot, it still comes out to a low weight of 15.1 ounces. I was blown away at this weight to capability ratio, so I threw it on and got to work without even zeroing it. This setup is one compact slayer with tons of utility, so of course I had to play around a bit. I then threw it onto a shorter configuration with a can and did a quick 0 so that I could slap some hits. If you noticed, I was only using the top dot here and not the canted dot. Of course I ran both, but running a canted dot suppressed, they tend to shoot hot gas and propellant chips straight into your eye, something that a lot of people fail to mention. Yes, I could wear iPro, but we'll never know where a self-defense situation will get us, and if we'll even have iPro waiting around, so I prefer the top dot personally. This top RMR has a center line of 4.36 inches above the bore if you're interested in trying out zeros like I showed in my height above bore video, which I highly suggest you watch if you're running higher top dots like this. This video is a gem, and because of demonetization issues, it killed my views, which was pretty sad, since there's so much good information in this video. This is almost the same as the stock ACOG RMR height, and I ran a simple 100-yard zero, and you saw how effective this top dot was. These pairs are at 40 yards on a reduced C-zone target, and it felt like I was running a normal red dot. With a little time, you can see the top dot can be very effective, with of course that 5x down below. On top of this, you have a passive option until you can afford a good IR laser after buying your nods. This setup has been a pleasure to run, to be honest. One of my favorite surprises in a long time, and it even looks right. Of course, the optic is still a little glossy and funny looking, so let's do something about... We saw the good, the bad, but what about the ugly? I guess with the Hero Mod mount and the kill flash, this thing finally takes on a pretty decent look, except for the shiny coating. So I want to give my final thoughts, coming from a guy who buys high-end optics. I see comments occasionally that say this is just as good, but for half the price. And from a quality standpoint, no. It's not just as good as something like the A-Cult. From a usability standpoint, it's definitely usable. Of all the features I covered, some of the cons don't really matter, except maybe the sensitive eye box and the thicker reticle for distance shots. I'm honestly a practical dude, and I was able to put in some work with this 5X package. The more I used it, the more I felt spoiled for how small and light it is, especially with the top dot combo. By the time I needed the 5X, I had some time to work out the eye box issues and get fast hits. It's slim, it's durable, and I've already had several new shooters pick one up so that they can run a prism for a while before deciding to upgrade to a higher end version. I like this one so much I bought a second one off Brassfax because I destroyed the first one I had. I actually plan to keep this one in my arsenal because I couldn't find a reason to really get rid of it. With the top dot mount from Hero Mod, I have become quite fond of this little guy, and besides all the poking I did throughout this video, I get why you'd buy one. And I truly am looking forward to the progression of prisms from both Primary Arms, Trijicon, and others who see the value in this type of optic. For the future, I think Primary Arms is sincerely paying attention to what the consumers want. From the compact build, the numerous mounts and accessories available, great instructions and information on zeroing included, you really get a sense that someone is willing to work towards what the people want and need. I can't wait to see what the future brings us as the tech gets better, and I hope to see companies moving their manufacturing to America if they aren't already. After all, they've made quite a nice chunk of change off of us already. This video took a lot of time and resources to make, so do me a solid and check out the links in the description. Thanks to all the new and loyal subscribers. You all are truly the best.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Found it. Dude, he's so hard.